Good morning, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to you. Some recent days ago, I became very angry with someone in this church, and immediately after that encounter, I called an elder of the congregation, a spiritual leader, and shared with him how I was disappointed in myself in the way that I handled the matter, which needed to be dealt with. And then several days later after that, I went to the individual and apologized for my manner of becoming angry. You need to know something about me. I'm not a yeller, and I did not yell then, but when I'm angry, it is unmistakable. That may be true for any of us. When we are angry, we don't disguise it very well. Now, one may argue, Doug, were you justified in your anger? But to argue that question is to dodge bad behavior. I will not dodge bad behavior. I was angry, and I should not have been. It should have been handled in a different way. The reason I shared this with you is that when we go to the third chapter of Genesis, we see that God has intended for Adam and Eve, and therefore all of mankind, to follow the will of God and to follow, more importantly, in God's direction. God created the heavens and the earth and everything that is in them. God created man and woman. And then God said, I'm asking you to travel in my direction. We see this specifically in the third chapter of Genesis when God says, I have provided for you an abundance to eat. But there's one tree at the center of the garden you are not to eat from. God is not negotiating. God is saying, you will go my way. And man and woman and Adam and Eve decided that they wanted to make the world more about themselves than about God. They wanted to go their way rather than God's way. And that is the root of all sin. When they decided they were going to be more concerned about themselves than someone else or even God. The reason it is so difficult for us to own it when we behave badly towards someone else is because we make it all about ourselves rather than placing relationships or God the center of our world. C.S. Lewis once said that pride is the greatest sin. In fact, C.S. Lewis said that unchastity and bitterness and anger are all mosquito bites compared to the sin of pride. When we are unable to apologize for bad behavior, we have placed ourselves at the center of our world. We are saying that how I feel is more important than anyone else or any relationship. God has called us to place relationships above our own selves. The great commandment is that we are to love others and we are to love God. It doesn't say that we are to love ourselves. It doesn't have to be said. Most of us love ourselves. So God has the corrective of love others and love God. I will share with you that as the pastor of this congregation, I've become aware of two people in this church who used to be friends for years, and now they don't speak to each other. Who they are is irrelevant, and naturally I'm not going to share who they are. But I wonder what it is that happened in that relationship that they no longer speak to each other. Could it be that they are infected with pride that infects all of humankind? They are making themselves the center of the world. And so therefore they cannot get over themselves to reach out to the other person, even if the other person is wrong, and say, I value the relationship more than myself. I am willing to be reconciled if you are being willing to be reconciled. I want you to think about that this morning. Oftentimes when we behave badly, it is hard for us to apologize because we make it about ourselves. We think we're right, and we become stubborn. But that is pride. That is the breeder of all sins that come after that. I'll close with these words. Peter, the Apostle Peter, is the apostle that I most identify with. That is because Peter, of all the disciples, was perhaps the most stubborn. Peter had a PhD in making everything about himself. We see evidence of that in many ways, but one I'll point to. Peter is frustrated with Jesus Christ and the direction that Jesus is going in his ministry, and Peter says something like this: Jesus, we've given up everything to follow you. What's in it for us? And And then sometime later in the ministry of Jesus Christ, Peter realizes that he has been making everything about him rather than about God and relationships. And when Jesus draws near, Peter says, "Oh, Lord, leave me. Please leave me. I am a despicable person, and I don't deserve to be in the presence of the holy." The good news of the gospel is that Jesus Christ never leaves me, and in fact makes Peter the rock upon which Jesus builds the church. So I ask you this morning, are you estranged from anyone in your family or your friendships? Could it be that perhaps pride is in the way? You're making it all about yourself rather than valuing the relationship over yourself? Pride is the sin that leads to all other sins. So it is the most difficult to overcome. But through prayer and recognizing that there's something greater than ourselves, we can find the strength to say, "I'm sorry," when it should